Snow fell like 1,000 quiet witnesses the morning Clara Mae Hollister stood in her lace-trimmed dress, a newborn pressed to her breast. The church smelled of pine resin from garlands strung across the beams, and candlelight trembled in the draft that slipped through the door. Her veil clung to her damp lashes. Every tick of the wall clock was louder than the last, each one a hammer driving the truth deeper. He was not coming. The townsfolk sat stiff in their pews, their whispers threading through the hush like brittle twigs snapping under weight. A baby's faint cry echoed, soft as a plea, and Clara shifted the child in her arms, trying to soothe her, though her own heart beat so violently she feared it might split open. Hope. That was the name she had given her daughter in a moment of fierce, desperate belief that some better day would come. Yet in that instant, hope felt heavier than any burden she had ever known. The minister cleared his throat. His Bible remained closed. From the back row, Martha Langley's voice cut sharp through the stillness. No groom worth his salt leaves a girl standing with a babe in arms. A low chuckle rippled, quickly stifled, but its sting remained. Clara felt her cheeks burn. Shame was hotter than the fire she had hoped to find in marriage. Her legs trembled beneath the silk of her gown as she stepped down from the altar. The long white train snagged on the splintered wood of the floor. Sheriff Dalton Griggs shifted his hat in his hands, eyes soft but distant, pity without promise. No one rose to follow her. No one reached for her hand. She pushed through the church doors, and the winter wind struck like a slap. Snow whirled around her, lacing her hair with ice. The bells overhead told the hour, their sound hollow, almost cruel, marking not a union, but a sundering. Clara pulled Hope closer, wrapping the child in her shawl, though the thin fabric did little against the storm. Her breath fogged before her face, a ghost of herself unraveling into the frozen air. On the steps she faltered, knees weakening. She had dreamed of stepping down those stairs as a bride, head held high, her child legitimized in the eyes of all. Instead she stood deserted, whispers spilling from the doorway behind her like smoke. Josiah Pike, the saloon keeper, leaned against the frame, his grin crooked, a predator sniffing scandal. "Guess the groom sobered up," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter bubbled like poison. Clara's throat tightened. She lowered her head, clutching Hope until the infant stirred and whimpered, her only anchor against the tide of ridicule. Then came the sound of hooves crunching against ice, slow and deliberate. A figure emerged from the whiteness of the road, tall and broad, his coat dark with snow, his hat pulled low. Elias Boone, the rancher. Few in town knew more than fragments of his story. How he'd lost a wife to fever. How he spoke less than a dozen words on any given day. He lived at the edge of the valley, where his land touched the river's bend. His silence was a legend in itself, feared and respected in equal measure. He paused at the bottom of the steps, watching her with eyes that carried the weight of storms already weathered. Clara's breath caught. She shifted, unsure whether to flee or plead. But Hope whimpered again, and the sound seemed to tether her where she stood. Elias did not speak. Instead, he bent, retrieving the baby's blanket that had slipped into the snow. His gloved hand brushed the fabric clean, then offered it to her with a steadiness that pierced the trembling world. Their gazes met. Hers brimmed with humiliation, his unreadable, like the frozen river that ran silent but powerful beneath its surface. Still, she thought she glimpsed something, recognition perhaps, of pain that mirrored his own. He adjusted the blanket around the baby with careful precision, as if handling something holy, then straightened and extended his arm. A gesture quiet yet commanding. Behind them, Martha's voice hissed again, thick with glee. "Well, looks like she found herself a savior." Josiah's laugh followed, grating as boots on gravel. Clara's stomach clenched. To take Elias's arm would be to feed the gossip like grain to chickens, yet to refuse would mean facing the snow alone. Her child chilled against her breast. Elias said nothing. He simply stood, steady as a pine, waiting. The silence between them spoke louder than any vow. With trembling fingers, Clara placed her hand in the crook of his arm. His coat was rough wool, coarse against her skin but warm. The baby shifted, sighing softly as though in relief. Together they descended the steps. The hush that fell over the watchers was thicker than the snow. The wagon waited at the street's edge, its boards dusted white, the horses stamping clouds into the air. Elias lifted Clara with effortless strength, settling her onto the seat as though she weighed nothing at all. He draped his own heavy coat across her shoulders and tucked it around Hope, whose small face nestled into the fold. Clara's eyes stung with tears, but not from the cold. She had been abandoned, humiliated, left to freeze under the gaze of every cruel mouth in town. Yet here was a man who had asked nothing, promised nothing, and still offered the only thing that mattered: shelter. Elias climbed onto the bench beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses surged forward, snow spraying from their hooves. Clara glanced back once at the church doors, where shadows clustered like vultures. Then she turned her face toward the open road. Beside her, Elias kept silent. The sleigh bells jingled softly, a fragile music against the storm. Hope's breathing grew steady, lulled by the rhythm of hooves and the warmth of her mother's arms. Clara leaned into the coat draped over her, inhaling the faint scent of smoke and pine that clung to Elias Boone. In the distance, the valley stretched pale and endless, the horizon blurred by snowfall. The town grew smaller behind them, its gossip swallowed by the wind. Ahead lay only the unknown, but for the first time that day, Clara felt the faintest stirrings of something she had almost forgotten: safety. The narrator's voice lingers here, as though from the other side of years. Sometimes, salvation does not announce itself in thunder or song. Sometimes it arrives wordless, on a wagon bound through snow, in the silence of a man who chooses to walk beside your shame and make it his own. And so it was that Clara Mae, abandoned bride with her newborn child, began a journey she had not expected, one that would test the weight of dignity, the patience of the heart, and the quiet strength of a rancher who spoke less with words than with the way he carried others through the storm. The valley held its breath that winter, a world of snowbound fences and smoke curling from chimneys, where every sound seemed softened, as if the land itself respected silence. Clara settled into Elias Boone's ranch house with the caution of a sparrow testing a new branch. The cabin was plain: rough-hewn beams, a stone hearth, shelves lined with jars of beans and dried corn, but it was warmer than she had dared to hope. The fire burned steady, fed each morning by wood Elias cut before sunrise. He left neat piles by the door without announcement, his boots tracking lines in the snow. He never explained, never asked for thanks, yet Clara noticed. She noticed everything. At night, when the wind howled like wolves across the plains, Clara would press Hope against her chest, her heart steadying with the child's breath. Elias sat near the fire, mending tack or sharpening a blade, his profile lit in amber glow. His silence was not emptiness, but something alive, a presence that steadied the air between them. Sometimes Clara caught herself wanting to speak into it, to ask what he carried in his chest that made him so still, but she feared breaking the fragile peace that wrapped around them like a quilt. Spring came slow, the thaw carving rivulets through the drifts. Clara walked to town one morning, Hope bundled in her shawl, her own shoulders wrapped in the coat Elias had insisted she keep. The streets buzzed with wagons and merchants shaking winter from their bones, but every glance found her. Martha Langley, lips pinched like a trap, leaned toward a friend and whispered loud enough for Clara to hear. "Shame wears no veil. She's living under his roof without vows." Josiah Pike leaned from his saloon porch, smirk curling as he called out, "The rancher keeps her fed, I hear." "Bread for company, eh, Clara?" Laughter spilled after him, harsh and brittle. Her cheeks burned. She kept her chin high, though her stomach twisted. Shame was a familiar cloak, but now it pressed heavier because it threatened to stain not only her but Elias too. She returned to the wagon with trembling hands, aware of every eye upon her. When Elias loaded the flour and beans she had purchased, he said nothing, but his jaw was set, his movements sharper than usual. On the drive back, the silence was weighted, not like the quiet evenings by the fire, but like the moment before a storm splits the sky. Back at the ranch, Clara tried to shake it from her mind. She poured coffee into Elias's cup that evening, her fingers brushing the rim. "I don't want to bring you trouble," she whispered, barely audible above the crackle of flames. Elias lifted his gaze, meeting hers with a steadiness that stole her breath. He did not speak. Instead, he reached for the mug, his calloused hand brushing hers, holding it there just a moment too long, as if to tell her without words that she belonged. And that was answer enough. Days blurred into weeks, each marked by the rhythm of survival. Clara tended the garden plot, coaxing life from thawing soil. Elias fixed the roof, his hammer striking sure and patient. In the evenings, Clara sang lullabies, her voice fragile but growing stronger, while Elias lingered in the doorway, listening as if he had forgotten what song sounded like. Hope gurgled, her tiny fists waving toward him, and Clara noticed how his hard lines softened in those moments. He would kneel, clumsy but gentle, offering his finger for her to grasp. The sight stirred something in Clara, an ache, but not of sorrow. It was the ache of longing, of recognizing that care could be given without demand. One night after Hope had drifted to sleep, Clara stepped outside. The sky stretched endless above her, the stars cold and bright as diamonds scattered on black velvet. Elias was at the corral, his breath clouding as he checked the horses. Clara found herself watching him. The way his movements carried a rhythm older than words, as if he belonged more to the land than to men. She realized then that the silence she had feared was not emptiness. It was depth, like the stillness of water so deep you could not see the bottom. She shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of her own heart awakening. Yet the world beyond their valley was not so still. Rumors fattened with each retelling. By the time the town gathered for the spring fair, the air was thick with judgment. Clara dressed plainly, holding hope against her, determined to show her face, to prove she was not hiding. Elias walked beside her, his presence a shield, though he said nothing. At the fairgrounds, Josiah Pike found his stage. He leaned against a post, whiskey in hand, eyes sharp with cruelty. "There she is," he crowed. "The bride who couldn't keep a groom, now living off another man's roof. Tell me, Boone, how much charity does it take to keep a woman like that?" The crowd chuckled, eager for spectacle. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She lowered her head, shame rising like floodwater. But Elias moved. Slow, deliberate, he stepped forward, the ground seeming to still beneath him. His silence had always been a wall, but now it broke, his voice rough from disuse yet steady as iron. "She and the child are mine," he said, each word ringing clear. "I claimed them the day the snow fell." The crowd hushed. Josiah's smirk faltered. Martha Langley blinked, her lips parting as if she'd swallowed her own spite. Clara lifted her gaze, tears brimming, not from humiliation, but from the rawness of being defended, of being seen. Elias's words were not loud, not boastful, but they carried more weight than any shout. He had chosen, and he had done so without hesitation. Hope stirred against her, as if echoing the moment. Clara stepped closer to Elias, her hand brushing his arm. Not in gratitude alone, but in recognition of something deeper. The bond forged not in vows spoken before men, but in gestures, in firewood stacked, in coats draped over shoulders, in silence that sheltered instead of shamed. As the murmurs died, the fair carried on, but something had shifted. The gossip had been silenced, not by argument but by truth too plain to deny. Clara felt lighter, her chest expanding as though she had been holding her breath all winter and could finally inhale. That night, as they returned to the ranch, the horizon burned with the last light of day, gold fading into violet. Clara watched Elias guide the horses, his profile etched against the sky. She realized she no longer feared the road ahead. Whatever storms remained, they would face them together. And the voice that carries this memory to you now, across years and miles, leaves one truth in your keeping. Love is not always the thunder that splits the heavens, nor the vows spoken loud enough to echo through a church. Sometimes it is the quiet claim of a man who places his coat on a child not his own, never asking for it back. Sometimes it is a woman finding her dignity not in what the world allows her, but in the shelter of steady hands that will not let her fall. If this story found a place in your heart, linger with us for more Wild West tales. Subscribe, and let these old echoes ride with you a little further down the trail.